uh, Max Lugavere. Lugavere, have I pronounced your name
Lugavere,
correct?
close enough.
Thank you. Is a health and science journalist and the New York Times best-selling author of Genius Foods and The Genius Life. He's the host of the top health podcast, The Genius Life. He focuses on nutrition, exercise, performance, and longevity with a focus on brain and mental health. This talk is how to genius foods for your brain. So, thank you very much, Max. Take us away.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Max, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview in such short notice. This is just like perfect. Yesterday I was like, I really want someone to talk about foods today. And then I got the message from Annie. It was just like, it was like playa magic. I was like, this is perfect.
Love that. Love that. Serendipity, you know? I mean, we can't be on the playa in body, but I guess we're there in spirit.
Something definitely is happening. And
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm very envious of your title, Genius Foods. As soon as I saw your book and I saw the title, I was like, man, I wish I had that book.
I've heard that before. Yeah, it's a very good title. It's a very good title, I will admit. Yeah, my passion is, you know, brain health, mental health, dementia prevention. But I knew that if I was actually going to move the needle on any of these issues, that I couldn't call my book the dementia prevention book or anything like that. I had to have something that was instantly accessible and relatable and aspirational. And so, yeah, I'm very happy that it worked out that way. But you know what? I don't own the word genius, so
So
happy to share.
if I swipe that on one of my book titles, you won't get too mad.
I mean, I guess it ultimately depends, but in the spirit of Burning Man and just endless abundance in the universe, you know, I would say do what you'd like.
Fabulous. I'll do History of the World Part 2. I'll do Genius Foods Part 2.
Love it.
And I don't know if y'all know this, but Max is totally decked out in his Burning Man gear. You look fabulous. Thank you for wearing the goggles and the camelback. You're perfect.
Of course, man. You know, I was lamenting the fact that that nobody could be there this year, and I actually didn't go last year. I've only been once. I went in 2018, and this is like my gear. And just since then, it's been in my closet, gathering dust. And yeah, I welcome the opportunity to break it out and don it again. That was a transformative year in many ways for me. So, you know,
Great. So how has Burning Man touched you, Max? How has that helped you transform your life?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, actually. So you know, I'd been hearing about Burning Man for many, many years prior to actually going. In fact, I knew about Burning Man, I think, before the vast majority of people that are probably currently attending the festival. I grew up in New York City, and we had a public access TV channel um, you know, in my home growing up. And late at night, it would always turn to like the stripper channel almost. It was like sort of a nudie channel that just was able to eke through on the cable lines. I don't really know how it worked, but during the day, it was just sort of like blank. There was like nothing on it. But at night, it was an opportunity for, you know, 12-year-old me to see boobs for the first time. So me and my brothers would gather in one of our bedrooms and we would put it on. And it was like this, yeah, it was like a stripper channel. Like the Robin Bird show was on it, which I just remember as a horny preteen, just, you know, getting a kick out of being able to see. I'm sure many people watching this can relate to that. But one night I turned it on, and it was this static frame of this alien landscape, and I had no idea what it was. I mean, it appeared to be a desert environment, but upon watching it, and you know, you'd see these people walk in and out. They were wearing these odd costumes. They were also like, you know, topless women, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, but I have no idea what this is. It's like, this is not a show. This is just like a raw feed of some weird thing happening in the desert. And this was probably in the mid 90s. And eventually there was some kind of like titling on the screen, and I learned that it was Burning Man. And I had no idea what Burning Man was at the time. There was no internet. So it was like this really interesting thing, but that got implanted in my brain. And later on, as an adult, I would start hearing about Burning Man, this amazing festival. And yeah, and like I was able to put two and two together. And then I worked for a TV network that had the first ever sort of professional videography from the playa, and the network was called Current TV. And I worked for them, and everybody that all the executives of the network were all big fans of Burning Man. They'd all gone. They had structures like the president of programming there had Black Rock Bijou, which was like this movie theater for many years that he had out there. So I had heard about Burning Man for many, many years, and I finally went in 2018, and it was a transformative, beautiful experience. I mean, I loved it, and I remember feeling very getting very emotional when I went to the temple, because what I've personally been dealing with over the past few years, my mom had been very sick at the time, and she was struggling with dementia, and that is what in many ways motivates my work. Um, and I remember going to the temple and feeling just overcome with sadness, and hope for the situation, and crying and leaving a note and dedicating it to my mom. And it was super strange that I had that experience, and then I got back to LA, and I was living in New York at the time, but I got back to LA after Burning Man, and I got a call from my brother that my mom was in the emergency room, literally the day after getting back from the playa. And without really amassing too many details, I changed my flight and I went home back to New York the very next day. And my mom was in the emergency room, and that day, essentially, she was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. And it was immediately after Burning Man. It was immediately after that experience. And after that, sort of the emotional highs and lows of Burning Man followed a 3-month period, which was probably the most difficult period I ever experienced in my whole life, where my mom was, she was terminally ill due to the cancer, and was put on hospice. And then 3 months after that, passed away. And that was at the end of 2018. So from Labor Day 2018 to mid-December 2018, I watched my mom, wither and ultimately pass away. So it was a crazy experience, and one that I'll never forget.
Wow.
Yeah, insane, just insane. And my mom motivates my work. So, for people listening, tuning in, I write about health and nutrition sort of through the lens of brain health. And the reason why I'm so passionate about brain health is because my mom, prior to this cancer diagnosis, had a rare form of dementia called Lewy body dementia. And she was diagnosed initially in 2011. And that set me off on the journey to learn as much as I possibly could about diet, lifestyle, and how, the myriad of variables that fall under those two umbrellas could contribute to somebody experiencing cognitive decline and ultimately being diagnosed with dementia and succumbing to conditions like Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common form of dementia. And it basically forced me to become an independent investigator. I wear the hat journalist because, as a journalist, you're sort of trained in a way, not nearly as rigorously, but, similar to the way scientists are trained to ask questions and seek answers in a way that, in a way that's sort of thorough and, skeptic, always being a skeptic. And that really is what led to this, to years and years and years of research on my part, ultimately culminating in, a book, 2 books now, and my podcast and everything like that. But it's all motivated by the fact that my mom was very sick, and there was very little that I could do to help her, and there was very little that Western medicine could do to help her. And so, on the one hand, I'm very dedicated to the science of all this, and communicating what the science says with accuracy and with the great responsibility that I know that I have, having built a platform over the past few years. But I'm also, I like to say that I'm evidence-based, but I'm not evidence-bound. I think that there's a lot of sort of traditional wisdom that I think, that we owe to our ancestors to be explored and things like that. So I'm very, I think I'm very open-minded, but at the same time, really dedicated to the science and to helping people kind of like separate fact from fiction, steer clear from misinformation, and things like that. So that's sort of like the work that I do. And yeah, happy to talk about whatever you'd like to talk about.
So you got passionate about brain foods and brain health in part because you wanted to help your mother with her dementia.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in tandem with that, it was to prevent it from happening to myself. Because, you know, when you have a loved one develop any kind of chronic illness, you know, suddenly that becomes a risk factor for you. So suddenly, you know, for the first time, at least to my knowledge, I had a risk factor for dementia because my mom had it. And so it was, to me, it was about figuring out what, if anything, could be done to help my mom. But then at the same time, you know, like I was very interested to know what steps I could be taking in my own life to minimize the chances that I'll ever have to succumb to what my mom, you know, ultimately, what ultimately led to her demise. And one of the most sort of shocking discoveries that I made was that dementia often begins in the brain decades before the first symptom. So this was not something that I felt like I could worry about later. This is something that, you know, that I realized I needed to start thinking about today, because if you subtract 30 from my mom's age at the time, you get me. And so I really started to dedicate my life. I did dedicate my life to learning and then applying what I was learning into my own life, sort of as a you know, walking, talking experiment. And then I started sharing what I was, you know, learning out with my audience. And I realized very early on that I was fulfilling a need. You know, like, it's one thing to just share stuff on social media, but I very soon started to realize that that people weren't getting this information from anywhere else, and that it really was important for me to continue sharing. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's disturbing to me how little doctors talk to their patients about diet and effectively about diet and the brain, how little research they know. Like I think I read, I don't know if it's the same paper, but I read about inflammation at age like 30 predicts dementia at age 60 or age 70. So 30 years, you know, before dementia is likely to strike, you know, your inflammation levels can predict the likelihood of getting dementia. Like, that's massively important information that like people in their 30s and 40s don't understand about the choices we make now are going to impact us. That's 30, 40 years down the road. And, you know, I think you're right. Very few people are sharing that information with them. So let's get down to brass tacks here. If you were just to be able to get just a, you know, the key 20, you know, the 80-20 rule, what's the critical 20% people need to know about food and their brain? And let's take it from the perspective of our age group. Let's say millennials, Gen X, and then what do the baby boomers need to know, the key 20% about food and their brain?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say that the salient points are applicable to people across the age spectrum, with the exception of maybe, you know, babies, infants, and things like that. They have, you know, certain dietary needs that you know, that's sort of outside of my scope. But I would say generally, you know, we live in a time where the dietary challenges that that we're faced with tend to be uniform across the population. Now, people are at different sort of areas on the socioeconomic spectrum, and so there's the question of food access and equity and things like that, which we can talk about. But generally speaking, the vast majority of us are overfed and undernourished. We're overfed because the majority of calories that we're consuming come from ultra processed foods made essentially from just 3 plants. So if you look around the world, there are about 50,000 edible plant species. We're eating 3 of them: wheat, corn, and rice, and then soy, you know, depending on where in the world you happen to live. But for the most part, those 3 plants are very energy rich, but nutrient poor. You know, a whole corn on the cob is a very delicious food, but generally speaking, when you take the starch out of corn, there's not a lot of essential nutrients in it. The same goes for rice. The same goes for wheat. And so that's why when you look at these,
I'm sorry, did you say 90% of our diet comes from these 3 foods: wheat, corn, and rice? Is that the general statistic?
60%.
60%. Okay, I want to get that's a fantastic number. In fact, like, fantastically scary, but that's amazing. 60% from 3 plants. I'm sorry, please continue.
Yeah, just 3 plants. Just 3 plants. And yeah, there's nothing sort of inherently wrong with that, or rather with the plants. I certainly enjoy rice on sushi when I'm, eating sushi, for example. But the fact that these have become sort of the foundational foods of our diet, that's what's problematic. The fact that at every meal, it's sort of either a sandwich or a bowl of pasta or a rice bowl or, what have you. And again, these foods are energy rich. Uh, these foods are actually the part of the plant where energy is stored. So that's why they're so dense with, starch, which almost as soon as they pass your lips begin to break down into their constituent sugar molecules. And they don't contain very many nutrients. That's why when you walk through the aisles of your average supermarket, nearly all of the packaged processed foods, especially the ones that are wheat based, are enriched with synthetic vitamins and minerals because they've become essentially depleted of or they were lacking initially, and then they become further depleted through the production process. And so these foods are, they typify the standard American diet. They usually have, added sugar, which is basically empty calories, and added fats from unhealthy oils, which we can talk about. So really what I implore people to do is to minimize their consumption of ultra processed foods, and instead to base their diets around foods that I call genius foods. I've sort of, taken the term superfoods and co-opted it and made my own sort of version of it. And genius foods to me are foods that really have a solid nutrient profile. They're very nutrient dense, and they're also going to be very satiating. So this is super important. I mean, for most people today, when you consider the statistics that 2/3 of adults are either overweight or obese, the best diet for you is going to be the one that minimizes your hunger, so that you're not walking around hungry all day looking for your next snack. So the foods that I recommend are the most nutrient dense. So they're going to be the antidote to that overfed and undernourished paradigm. And I essentially call them genius foods. And we can go through the list. These are foods that typically you'll find around the perimeter of your supermarket. Very few people realize that supermarkets tend to be designed the same way. Around the perimeter of the supermarket is where you find all of the perishable fresh foods. And those are the foods that, generally speaking, are going to be the best for you. It's the aisles where you find all of the shelf-stable, non-perishable, packaged, processed, ultra-processed foods. So foods like avocado, grass-fed beef, wild salmon, nuts. So these foods are all incredibly beneficial because they provide not only the raw materials that your brain uses to create healthy new brain cells, which we now know the adult brain can do up until death, but they provide protector molecules, so very important antioxidants that your brain uses to essentially fend off what we call oxidative stress, which is when the brain is under inflammatory assault. And we know that inflammation can exacerbate pre-existing conditions, and it might be a causative player in conditions like Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. So I think basing your diet around those foods sort of being the base of the pyramid, crucially important. You mentioned chocolate. I think chocolate is actually almost a perfect brain food. Actually, I'm a huge fan of dark.
What do you mean by almost?
Well, I would say the one thing that I wish chocolate had that it doesn't is probably a little bit of protein. So it's not it's not like a food that I would consider a complete food, but it's definitely a very powerful brain food for a number of different reasons. So it's very good for cardiovascular health, as you know, rich source of magnesium, copper, things like that.
So add some chia seeds or some hemp seeds to it, and then we got ourselves a superfood.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Max, I would love it if you would run down the list just real quickly, because I know there's a lot of note takers out there that just want like your list of the top 10 or 20 foods just to bang that out so they can just have that. And then we can go into more detail about why they're so good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned avocados, dark leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, nuts, grass-fed beef, any type of berry, wild fatty fish, so salmon is a great example of that, eggs, extra virgin olive oil. I think that's it. I think we covered 10.
Avocado, grass-fed beef, dark leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, nuts, any berries, wild fatty fish, eggs, extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah, and dark chocolate. So those are the 10.
Fabulous.
Yeah, so those are the 10 genius foods. And then there's like a bonus type of food that I didn't include on that initial list, but for your listeners, they might enjoy this bonus: mushrooms. And I know people that go to Burning Man are, you know, sort of preaching to the choir the value of mushrooms, but I'm talking about the culinary mushrooms.
Yeah.
Um,
We had Paul Stamets on like 2 hours ago. And he was
nice.
talking about both culinary mushrooms and psilocybin. So yeah, you have
Dope.
a very captive audience on that.
Yeah, I
But
love
yeah.
that.
So why are mushrooms so valuable to the brain?
Well, mushrooms have a number of important vitamins, minerals, things like that. They also have beta glucans in them, which are immunomodulatory. But essentially, they're also a great source of very important antioxidant compounds like glutathione and ergothioneine. Porcini mushrooms being the most concentrated in those two. Glutathione is your body's mother sort of antioxidant and detoxifier, and you can consume glutathione. We make it in our own bodies, but you can also consume it exogenously from mushrooms. But a number of interesting epidemiological studies are coming out of Asia showing us that people who habitually consume mushrooms, about a serving and a half to 2 servings a week, seem to have a pretty dramatic risk reduction for developing mild cognitive impairment and even incident dementia. A risk reduction of about 30%, and that's not necessarily, I don't mean to suggest causation, but that is a very interesting finding.
What is risk dementia?
What is what?
Did you say risk dementia? I heard mild cognitive impairment. And what is it you said after that?
Incident dementia.
Incident,
so just like,
is that like from a head injury?
No. That's just basically like sporadic dementia. Just
Okay.
that it would occur. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. And so what's so fascinating about this, I was doing some reading on preventing and reversing dementia. So a glutathione cleanse. So I told my parents about this, that you can go to the doctor and get like glutathione pumped through your veins, and that'll like cleanse out your brain. It's a great heavy metal detox. And some people who have like mild to moderate cognitive impairment can like come back from that by like doing a glutathione cleanse like 2 times a week with their doctor, to really cleanse out with that powerful antioxidant. And then selenium is really important in making glutathione. But I didn't know, I heard that glutathione supplements weren't so easily bioavailable, but I didn't know that mushrooms were so rich in glutathione. I didn't know that was such a great source of that powerful antioxidant.
Yeah, glutathione is important. I think your own liver's production of it probably dwarfs the amount that you would consume from food. And I'm not sure that that exogenous glutathione would necessarily be a cure for mild cognitive impairment. I'd love to see any data on that, but yeah, you can boost levels. You can support your own body's levels. It is poorly bioavailable from supplements. From food, I believe the bioavailability is a bit higher, and then also you can take certain glutathione supplements in preparations like they have like liposomal glutathione supplements now that I think are somewhat more bioavailable.
Okay.
I think that these are all worth mentioning, but generally your body is going to make a lot more glutathione than what you would ever reasonably be, able to supplement with on your own. And so actually to boost your body's own.
We need selenium. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
How do we boost?
Selenium super important. I mean, selenium.
Yeah, how do we boost glutathione?
Yeah. Well, so you want to consume foods that are rich in sulfur containing amino acids, and actually meat products are rich in cysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione. So beef, eggs, fish, things like that. You can also boost glutathione by eating certain cruciferous vegetables, which contain sort of plant detox compounds, plant defense compounds that are very efficient at stimulating your body's own glutathione pathways. Cruciferous vegetables are great. Broccoli sprouts would be, one that comes to mind in particular because of their rich concentration in a compound called sulforaphane, which has been shown to actually boost glutathione and specifically boost it in the brain. You can also consume foods like coffee, which has been shown to stimulate the NRF2 pathway, which upregulates glutathione production. You mentioned selenium. Selenium is an important mineral. for glutathione production. Before recording this, I consumed 2 Brazil nuts to get my day's worth of selenium to support my own glutathione pathways. And so yeah, so there are a number of things that you can do to upregulate glutathione, and your body pretty much does it for you when you consume a varied diet of whole plants and whole animal products. So
So for
you're
boosting
giving your body.
glutathione, so for boosting glutathione, you mentioned sulfur-containing foods that contains sulfur amino acids, meat products that are rich in cysteine, cruciferous vegetables. The plant defense actually stimulates the production of glutathione, coffee, and then Brazil nuts for selenium. You mentioned cysteine. Can you talk about homocysteine? Because I've heard homocysteine levels are related to dementia, the brain, and inflammation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so homocysteine is basically a waste compound in the body's methylation, produced via methylation, which occurs on a constant basis all over the body. And having elevated levels of homocysteine is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease. Eating a diet that contains ample folate, which you're going to get from dark leafy greens, can help keep your homocysteine levels down. Also consuming foods like fish and grass-fed beef, which provide creatine, can help lower your homocysteine. And for some people with certain genetic mutations, like the MTHFR variant, might actually be well suited taking a B complex, like a methylated B complex. That can also, the data shows, lower homocysteine and also help protect against brain atrophy. So there's a researcher named David Smith who's done a lot of this work. Personally, at a certain point, I had a blood test and I had, I think, a homocysteine level of 11, which is pretty unusual for a young person like myself. And I began taking a B complex, and I brought it down to, I think, 6 or 7. So generally, with homocysteine, the lower the better. Yeah, it's a pro-inflammatory sort of amino acid, and yeah, it's definitely something in sort of the Alzheimer's prevention toolkit to get checked on a regular basis.
And I want to go back to the Alzheimer's toolkit. That sounds really valuable, and it sounds like something I can like share with my parents and be like, "Oh man, I better get that shit checked out." That sounds really valuable. How is homocysteine related to cysteine?
Well, cysteine is an amino acid complex, and it sort of is the backbone to homocysteine. It also, man, let me go into the vault and try to. Yeah, I mean, homocysteine is essentially recycled. So it's created and then it gets recycled, but you need dietary cofactors in that recycling process. And then beyond that, I would have to, go sort of into the literature to answer more thoroughly.
But eating foods that have cysteine doesn't necessarily elevate your homocysteine.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Okay, great, because it'd be very easy to see those two things as like a linear thing.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to ask you. So Tim Ferriss talked about how the cholesterol content of food. This is in his book For Our Body, which was cutting edge 10 years ago, and still is pretty darn close. That like the cholesterol levels of food that we eat does not necessarily equate to a 1-to-1 ratio of cholesterol increase in our blood, for example. So people are like, oh, if you eat a high cholesterol diet, your blood levels are necessarily going to go up, or they go up significantly. Can you talk about that a little bit, and about how those are not necessarily 1-to-1 related of what we consume in cholesterol and fat relating to necessarily in those levels, of those lipid levels?
Yeah, so that's an important point. And there are always exceptions in biology, but for the most part, when you consume dietary cholesterol, it has no real effect on the cholesterol that your physician would measure when doing a typical lipid panel. Now, some people are hyperabsorbers, so some people actually can see a marked increase in cholesterol when they consume dietary cholesterol, but that's a minority. So, for the most part, what I tell people is not to worry about it. And it actually makes sense that, if you take an egg yolk, for example, which is sort of one of the most well-known examples of a high dietary cholesterol food. An egg yolk is literally designed by nature to contain all of the ingredients required to grow a healthy brain, because the nervous system is the first structure to assemble in an embryo. So an egg yolk, if you actually break an egg yolk down and look at all of its constituent nutrients, it's got everything needed for healthy brain function. And for that reason, it's rich in cholesterol. The brain is also where 25% of the cholesterol in your body is concentrated. But interestingly, you don't need to eat any dietary cholesterol to enrich your brain with cholesterol. All of the cholesterol in your brain is produced in the brain via what's called de novo cholesterol synthesis. So cholesterol is not a nutrient that you necessarily need to chase, but it also is not a nutrient that you need to be concerned about, again, if you are representative of the majority.
Can you spell, was it de novo something?
DE space NOVO, cholesterol synthesis. So basically that means like
our brain makes the cholesterol that we need. And so why is it that when I eat an egg yolk, that doesn't correspond to an increase in cholesterol in our blood? Is my body simply using that cholesterol for energy and other bodily functions?
Well, I mean, the amount of cholesterol that your liver produces on a day-to-day basis generally is going to exceed any dietary cholesterol that you consume. So your liver creates about 4 to 5 egg yolks worth of cholesterol every single day, whether or not you're eating dietary cholesterol. In fact, if you consume dietary cholesterol, you're actually going to see a small reduction in the amount of, because you do absorb some in the amount of cholesterol that you absorb in the gut. But generally, yeah, it's this elegant recycling system. So I mean, cholesterol that your liver produces then gets sort of put out into these little lipoprotein rafts, sort of fat carriers that then are sent all throughout the body. And these lipoproteins basically help the cholesterol stay solvent in blood, which, as you know, is mostly water, and oil and water don't mix. And then ideally that cholesterol is going to get resorbed back into the liver. And then it's usually used to create what are called bile salts. So some of that cholesterol you poop out, some of it gets absorbed back in from the small intestine. It's a very intricate plumbing system, but I think it's important to kind of be aware of that, because a lot of the time, the masses adopt these, like, if something sounds like, usually these simple sort of analogies make sense to the uninformed public, like, eating dietary cholesterol is going to, make my blood cholesterol go up, or eating dietary fat is going to make me fat, or eating saturated fat, which, is solid at room temperature, is going to clog my arteries. Usually, like, none of those things that I just said hold any validity whatsoever in terms of, the complexity of your biology. That's just like not how it works. But for the uninformed public, it seems to make sense. Like, it passes the sort of a simple test of logic, and so therefore it's got to be true. But that's just generally not how things work in the body.
Remember in the 80s, the egg craze of the 80s, how they're telling us that the cholesterol in eggs was like causing heart disease and killing people? I don't know. How old are you?
I'm 38.
Okay, so you remember that? You remember all those commercials where they're showing the egg cracking on on television, like it's like harming people's brains and hearts. It's like really bad. And egg beaters came out. It was like cholesterol-free eggs. Like, there's this whole movement of no cholesterol, and it's fascinating that doesn't have the scientific validity. I'd love to learn why it is that eating fat doesn't necessarily cause. So I understand that eating fat is like high calorie, and if you eat excess calories more than your body uses, that can get stored as fat, and that's kind of what we do with excess calories. And so why is it that eating a high fat diet? So like, if I eat chocolate, some people are concerned that like chocolate is like, oh, well, it's really high in fat, and fat isn't good for me. How can I help you understand that fat is not bad, that just eating fat does not equal an increase in like your lipids in your blood that's like causes heart disease and diabetes and inflammation?
Yeah. So first of all, just like carbohydrates, all fats, are not created equal. Chocolate is a great example of a fat that, to the uninformed person might say, oh my God, like, how could this possibly be good for me? Because it's rich in saturated fat. But actually, the type of saturated fat that chocolate is mostly comprised of is called stearic acid, which has been shown actually to boost mitochondrial function. And mitochondria are sort of the power plants of cells. And mitochondrial dysfunction is associated with aging, with decrepitude, with frailty, with neurological conditions, with age-related neurological conditions. And so, yeah, I mean, not all fat is created equal. And generally what happens if you eat a meal, for example, that has a lot of fat in it, you might see a momentary sort of postprandial or post-meal spike in triglycerides, which is fat in the blood. But that's okay. That's like, physiologic, makes sense. You're eating fat, your body is basically putting those fats to good use. But what might surprise you is that carbohydrate overfeeding actually leads to consistently elevated triglycerides in the blood, like fasting elevated triglycerides. And that doesn't, at least, on first glance appear to make a lot of sense, because carbohydrates are not fat. So how would that lead to an increase in fat in the blood? The problem is most people are sedentary, they overconsume carbohydrates. And when your liver is flooded with an excess of dietary carbohydrates, especially in a glycogen replete state, so when your liver is basically full of carbohydrates already, which it probably is for most people who are sedentary and over-consuming carbohydrates, you basically jumpstart this process called de novo lipogenesis. So remember the term de novo I used in brain cholesterol synthesis? Yeah. The liver can actually manufacture fat when being overfed carbohydrates. So again, it's like, it's not this simple system where fat, is the only thing that leads to fat. Carbohydrates can too. Your body is not really a typical, plumbing scenario. It's more of like a complex chemistry lab. And that's why science is so wonderful, because we slowly begin to figure this stuff out over years and years and decades and decades.
It's fascinating.
Such a huge fan of science.
It's fascinating to me that a lot of science and most medical doctors, it's slightly changing now, but most science, most medical doctors don't have an accurate understanding of how the body works regarding food. Like, it's just amazing to me, of all the things that are important to physical health, that this has been so neglected or so misunderstood in science and in the medical community. It's just fascinating to me. So like, a friend of mine went on the keto diet, and he started losing weight and feeling amazing. He wasn't obese, but he might've been borderline obese. Like he benefited from losing weight. His doctor would be like, yeah, great idea. And so he's losing all this weight. His doctor's like, hey, your cholesterol levels are kind of high. And he's like, I think this is scary. And he's like, and my friend's like, no, dude, that's what happens. Like, when you go into ketosis, your cholesterol levels kind of spike in the first like month, 2 or 3, and then they go back down. It's like this doctor had no idea what was happening. He was just like measuring these measurements. And it's like, oh, textbook says you're high. It's like, but dude, I'm fat, I'm losing weight, I feel great. Like, you got to look at the whole piece here, and maybe the idea that it's elevated for a short little while. Another one of my pet peeves, I don't know if you have any information about this, is that the understanding of how much herbs we can take for health is really not well understood. So like piperine, black pepper, I've read research literature for days on how much black pepper we can take, because it's a strong antioxidant. It's like a free radical scavenger, all these benefits, very few negative side effects. Like, there's a reason it's in all these culinary foods around the world. All the research I found was in mice or rats. And then I couldn't find any data on what like the max dosage that a healthy human could take for optimal benefit without like taking too much. There's like very little research on humans, how much black pepper we can take, or things like even like cinnamon. How much cinnamon should we be taking? A lot of it was just anecdotal stuff, like, oh, take a teaspoon. Like, that can't possibly be scientific. So I was wondering if you have any understanding or any good research on herbs and some of these powerful antioxidant herbs that are great for the brain that we can take. And if you know the doses, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, it's very hard to say. I don't think that, I don't think that doses have been established. And I think it's always better to err on the side of caution with these kinds of compounds. For example, cinnamon, which you brought up, cinnamon is a great anti-diabetic compound. It's anti-hyperglycemic, like it can help reduce blood sugar acutely. If you take cinnamon on a regular basis, it could also, improve your fasting blood sugar levels. This was recently shown in a trial, I believe, and I didn't look too closely into it, but cinnamon for many years has been shown to possess these incredible properties. But certain kinds of cinnamon are very high in a compound called coumarin, which is liver toxic. And generally what the spice that most people buy and have in their spice cabinet is from from the variant of cinnamon that is particularly high in coumarin. I believe it's cinnamon cassia, which you want to,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And
know,
then
you can,
and
yes.
Ceylon cinnamon is the one you want. You want CEYLON. That's the good kind of cinnamon. Cassia cinnamon is the bad kind of cinnamon.
Yeah.
That can hurt your liver if you take too much.
Yeah, exactly. Pepper, I'm not aware of any sort of health benefits of consuming pepper, other than the fact that pepper has been shown to inhibit some of the liver's sort of detox enzymes. So depending on you know, whether or not you're taking medications and things like that, pepper can either be a potentially useful compound in terms of, you know, its ability to increase the bioavailability of, you know, compounds that may otherwise be poorly bioavailable, like turmeric is the sort of classic example. You know, you find turmeric and specifically curcumin combined with piperine, which is black pepper extract.
Is it piperine or piperine? I've been saying piperine, but I want to say, is it piperine?
I always say piperine. But you know, who knows? Tomato, right?
Is it vasodilator or vasodilator?
I always say vasodilator, but
okay.
Yeah, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. Yeah, but you know, it's, again, I think, like, I've been in doctor's
anytime I hear
offices.
these new words pronounced, because I read a lot more of these words than I hear them spoken. So anytime I hear them spoken, I'm like, wait, oh, is that word? Okay, great.
Yeah, same.
The black pepper research, I was so frustrated reading it. I spent days reading it. I was so excited about the benefits to humans because it talked about the anti-cancer, the free radical scavenger, but there's so little human data. I was just really upset. I was like, man, why isn't anybody just running with this just for the benefit of humanity to let us know what would be a good dosage, what the benefits are based upon mammal research. And so I wanted to ask you, Max, I would love the Alzheimer's prevention toolkit. That seems like it's something really valuable that we would all benefit from. And also wanted to ask you about, quote, sneaky foods that like people think are healthy that really aren't, right? So like, I mean, diet soda is no longer a good example, but that would have been a good example 10 years ago. Oh, it's diet soda. Well, actually that's just terrible for your insulin and your brain. And like, you know, that you do much better just eating pure sugar. So I'd love to hear the Alzheimer's prevention toolkit. And then if we have time, some of the sneaky foods that people think they're like, oh, well, this is healthy.
Yeah, diet soda is a good example. I don't know if I agree. I think still diet soda, you know, is probably going to be way better for you than regular soda. Ideally, you want to avoid both, but you know, here's the thing: if you take somebody who's very overweight and perhaps even obese, and they, you know, you give them a dietary plan and it's working for them, but the one vice is that they need a Diet Coke. But they're losing weight otherwise, but they need that Diet Coke to feel good and to stay on track. And I say, have the Diet Coke, you know, not that I personally would ever, you know, like make that recommendation. You know, like there are worse things in the food environment to consume.
As a journalist, you'll love the story of the diet soda. I'll let you do most of the research yourself, but basically they doctored the studies, and the company was being investigated by the U.S. federal government, and people were like going to go to jail. And then Donald Rumsfeld took over as head of the FDA, and he was friends with the head of Searle, who's the company who approved it. And then he's like, oh yeah, this research is fine. Never mind. And then he appointed a new head of the FDA, and then they approved it for cakes and then for diet sodas, knowing that they literally cut out tumors out of rats in the experimental process of and the experiments on aspartame, which is NutraSweet. And then there's all these data on like it messes with your insulin really hardcore, more so than sugar, and so like it makes you like extra hungry. But the journalism story, which is it's stranger than fiction behind aspartame, is just a great. A fascinating story about like the fake food science, right?
Yeah, my friend Craig Clemens shared that story with me for the first time, and
oh, you know Craig?
I was blown away. Yeah, I know. Yeah, he's a good friend. He's awesome.
Okay, I met him through Eben.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Eben is his mentor, and they go way back.
Yeah,
Craig is the man, and yeah, I'm not endorsing aspartame. I personally avoid it. You know, I'm just saying, like, if we're making the comparison of aspartame versus you know, 38 grams of high fructose corn syrup, I would say, yeah.
Yikes! That's such a scary thing you just said. Woo, gotta shake that off.
Right. Yeah.
But
so yeah,
can you tell me about the Alzheimer's toolkit?
Yeah, I mean, the Alzheimer's toolkit is I mean, that's basically a term that I coined on the spot, but essentially it's like what to look for in your labs.
Brilliant.
and what to sort of keep tabs on as you get older to make sure that your brain continues to function well. And I would say homocysteine, I brought that up in the context of homocysteine. Homocysteine is definitely one of those things that you want to keep tabs on. Fasting blood sugar, fasting insulin, your insulin resistance, which can be measured with a test called your HOMA-IR. HOMA-IR is a very simple calculation that only requires two inputs, your fasting blood insulin, your fasting blood glucose, and gives you a sense of your insulin sensitivity, which insulin sensitivity you want. So you want to be more insulin sensitive. And they've also shown, insulin sensitivity in midlife is associated with better brain health as one ages. The same with inflammation. So, getting lab markers of inflammation, like your C-reactive protein and things like that. Every lab is going to have sort of a different reference range for these things. And I don't, off the top of my head, I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't have like these figures memorized exactly. But you also want to look at your omega-3, omega-6 index. You generally want your ratio to be about 1-to-1, which means that you're consuming adequate omega-3 fats and you're not over consuming omega-6 fats.
Now, is anyone ever consuming too much omega-3s? So I don't know if this story is true. I heard this crazy story that Tony Robbins was eating a ton of like tuna. And that he ended up eating like so much mercury, he ended up almost getting mercury toxicity. But like I eat a lot of omega-3s consciously, and I omit omega-6s consciously. And I know so is it possible to get out of balance with too much omega-3s? And is that a legitimate threat, or can I just take as much fish oil and eat salmon all day long, and the likelihood of that hurting me is very, very tiny?
I mean, I guess the short answer is I'm not sure. I don't think that it would be too big of a risk, although eating an excess amount of omega-3s can actually promote bleeding. So it can sort of have an anticoagulant effect, which is why before you have surgery, typically your doctor will ask you to stop taking fish oil and things like that. And so, for example, if you were at risk for falling, for example, or getting your head hit and you were taking an excessive amount of omega-3s, I would worry that you could cause a bleed in your brain, for example. Generally, if we're talking about a couple of grams of fish oil, I would say you're totally in the clear. Also, I know that about 4 grams of fish oil is the clinically studied dose that has been shown effective in terms of lowering triglycerides if you have elevated triglycerides. So I generally will take anywhere from 1 to 4 grams a day. I wouldn't go too far beyond that. And it's also important to not demonize omega-6 fats, because those are essential as well. So I don't see sort of a health reason in terms of why you'd want to have such a dramatically skewed ratio. In a healthy brain cell, you have omega-3s and omega-6s in a ratio of about 1-to-1. So yeah, hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So in the Alzheimer's Prevention Toolkit, we got homocysteine, fasting blood sugar, and fasting insulin, omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. What else?
Vitamin D levels, I think, are important. So making sure that your vitamin D levels are between 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. Vitamin D is an important hormone involved in many processes that favor brain health and mental health. And so I'd make sure that you're getting adequate vitamin D. What else would I look into? Yeah, I mean, those are off the top of my head. If you've got all of those sort of, lipids, your blood lipids, like getting an NMR panel and looking at your HDL, your LDL, the pattern of your LDL particles, making sure that that those cholesterol carriers are all healthy and functioning well, and that the recycling machinery in your liver is functioning well. And I write about all this stuff pretty extensively. My book Genius Foods, like, I do a super deep dive, and I wrote it actually with a medical doctor, so we go into depth into all these sorts of things and the nuances of cholesterol and the lipid panel and all that stuff.
No, no. What about creatine levels, magnesium, and selenium? So I asked a doctor about magnesium levels. He was like, "Oh yeah, no one I've ever tested has been low in magnesium." And then I read that you actually need to test inside the blood cell. Like they've been testing serum magnesium, which the body regulates pretty tightly. You want to
Yeah.
test magnesium inside cells. And I was like surprised and like mad that I found this. I'm like, why do I know this, but you don't? Because you're sampling my
Yeah.
blood. You should like know something about how to measure magnesium in the human body here, doc. But I want to ask you, so creatine and magnesium, would those be valuable things for someone to measure for preventing Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, I think that I don't know of any sort of clinically validated test for creatine and magnesium. Magnesium is a little bit hard to test for, and I know that, but I would have to sort of brush up on the research and try to, to give you a more complete answer to that. But magnesium is generally not something that people test for, nor is creatine. Um, the other thing is if you eat an omnivorous diet, uh, you're generally getting all the creatine that you need. Um, they've actually shown in studies that when vegans, vegetarians, and omnivores supplement with creatine, only the vegans and vegetarians see an improvement in their cognitive function.
Oh,
So
really? Oh,
yeah,
I didn't read that part of the study. I just read the benefit to the cognitive function. I'm like, all right, I'm taking creatine to boost my brain.
yeah.
It's only
I
the
mean, creatine definitely has performance enhancing benefits. A lot of people supplement with creatine for muscle anabolism and strength and performance and things like that. But from a cognitive standpoint, I think that just on a standard sort of omnivore, meat inclusive diet, you're basically getting all the creatine you need for your brain to sort of reach like a saturation point.
fantastic. And so I'd love to hear the foods that people should avoid that they think are actually okay or good for them. Any of the sneaky foods that are actually doing brain damage when we think we're making a healthy choice.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that a lot of the grain and seed oils that many people still consider to be healthy, I would avoid. So canola oil, a lot of like, for example, if you go to Whole Foods and you go to the prepared food section, it's all drenched for the most part in canola oil. And because anything that you buy at Whole Foods, right, is going to have a health halo. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
mistakenly assume that canola oil is benign or good for you, but neither of that is the case. So I would avoid those grain and seed oils: canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, grapeseed oil. Grapeseed oil is one of these ones that a lot of people somehow think is healthy because it has the word grape in it, um, but not good for health. Some of the more obvious things, fruit juices. I would say avoid fruit juice. It's basically pure sugar without the fiber. Orange juice, apple juice, pineapple juice, like whatever it happens to be. Avoid fruit juice. Vegetable juice is fine. And yeah, most granola bars are candy. Most cereals are, would be better suited as desserts, things like that. Um, Generally, when it comes to the best foods for you, they're going to be whole foods. They're going to be perishable foods, fresh foods, um, and yeah, I think that about does it.
Fantastic. So let me ask you. So we're in the times of the coronavirus here, and people might be prepping, stocking foods that aren't perishable. What would be your favorite brain foods for the prepper who's trying to store food for the next, let's say, six to 12 months? What are some shelf stable foods that you'd recommend to stock up that are great for the brain?
I love that question. So any type of canned salmon, canned tuna, canned sardines are a personal favorite. Sardines, there's a bit of a learning curve with them, but I think if you can get past the sort of initial ick factor, they're a wonderful food. They taste great, shelf stable. You can have them forever. You can stock up on them, and they are powerful brain food. I would say dark chocolate is another great example of a food that you can have in the house. Extra virgin olive oil, shelf stable. Stock up on that. Nuts, shelf stable, great source of healthy fats, fat soluble antioxidants. We talked about Brazil nuts earlier. Almonds are another great example. Pistachios are another really good example. I also, speaking of Burning Man, when I went to Burning Man in 2018, I stocked up on a lot of shelf stable healthy foods. Kale chips are another good example. It's a great way to get in those veggies in a way that is, you don't have to worry about preparing salads or anything like that.
I
Super
thought
useful.
a lot of those vegetable chips were like either deep fried or were processed in a way. Are they actually healthy?
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. You can find some that are not fried. I mean, many of the best ones that I found are actually baked. So you want to make sure that they don't have any added oils or sugars. And you can do that easily by looking at the back at the label. And a lot of the times you'll see these added fats and added sugars and things like that. But if you can find a brand that doesn't have, any added junk, then that's a keeper.
Have you read this one, Salt, Sugar, Fat by who's Michael Moss?
I haven't read it, but I can pretty much tell you what it's about based on the title.
It's so scary. He'll talk about like they're selling Twinkies and like different like Nabisco like competing with like Hershey's or like these big sugar companies, and they're like, well, they made this, and so we found like if we took out salt, we had to add fat, or if we took out fat, we had to add sugar, and so they're constantly modulating sugar, fat, and salt. I'm like, this is really scary because none of this sounds like they have any consideration for my body at all. Yeah. They're like it's just all about taste. It's all about market share, and they fight each other. Like, well, if you're gonna add more fat, we're gonna add more fat. We're gonna make a triple stuffed Oreo, and we're gonna add some salt to it. I'm like, holy fuck, people are eating this. Like, don't you know what you're doing? It's a scary but fascinating read. Salt, Sugar, Fat by Michael Moss. Made me think of that. So kale chips. Any other survival food?
Man, good question.
We got sardines, canned fish,
beef jerkies, different jerkies like beef jerkies, biltong. Beef jerky is great. I remember bringing lots and lots of beef jerky to Burning Man.
Really?
Yeah. You just want to make sure to find one that doesn't have too much added sugar. But they have a lot of good, great companies now that are doing that. One of my favorites, Paleo Valley, makes beef sticks that are just so tasty, so well seasoned.
Now, what about are they called nitrosamines in beef jerky? Some of those preservatives that are in like salami, those are pretty not good for the brain, right? Some of those stuff they're using like salted cured meats.
Yeah, I mean, so sodium nitrite in the body can be converted to nitrosamines or N-nitroso compounds, which, I think the jury is still out. I personally avoid those, but I've spoken to, different experts in nitric oxide and nitric oxide signaling, that have, suggested to me that they're not as bad as people sort of make them out to be. Nitrosamines are unhealthy. They're carcinogens and things like that. But you actually, when consuming nitrates with vitamin C, you actually prevent that conversion into those N-nitroso compounds. And what I've heard is that all of these like meat products, these processed meat products that have these compounds in them, add a little bit of vitamin C to the mix to prevent that conversion. I wouldn't necessarily trust that, so I personally choose to avoid them, and go for uncured products. But there's no doubt that from a larger sort of public health standpoint, that these sodium nitrite and things like that can help prevent botulism and pathogens from growing on meat and things like that. So yeah, I think that the benefits probably, from a public health standpoint, probably outweigh the risks. The problem with processed meat is that, when you're eating things like hot dogs or bologna sandwiches or whatever you want to call them, the question remains, like, is it the meat that's causing these problems and the nitrosamine compounds, or is it like everything else that you're probably eating if you're the kind of person who's going to eat a bologna sandwich or a ballpark hot dog? You know what I'm saying? We call that healthy user bias. And it's a major confounder in nutrition research, especially at the population scale. And so that's why nutrition research is so hard to do.
Oh, that's fascinating. If you eat hot dogs, what other shit are you putting into your body? What other dumb shit are you doing? Right?
Exactly.
I wonder what the Burning Man bias would be. If you go to Burning Man, what other cool shit are you doing with your life? Like that'd be such an interesting.
There you go. Yeah. Right.
For your sardines, do you go to Costco? I'm not supposed to mention that store. Do you go to a large store that's kind of cool to buy lots of sardines?
I do. I go to Yeah. Well, I mean, you can find them at any supermarket, but generally you want to just make sure that you're either getting them in water or you're getting them in extra virgin olive oil. You don't want to be eating sardines, which is otherwise a very healthy food, if they're soaked in unhealthy oils like corn oil, grapeseed oil, safflower oil, any of those.
Now, how do you like to serve your? You like to doctor them up? I agree. It took some time to figure out how. I eat 1 or 2 tins of sardines a day. That's like my primary source of protein aside from eggs, because
Wow.
it's cheap and it's really healthy and like it's easy, right? So, how do you like to doctor yours up? What do you spice yours up with?
I feel like I'm going to disappoint you, but I don't doctor them up. I just eat them out of the can. I just like eat them
Really?
straight up. Yeah. Sometimes I'll put them in a bowl with some avocado, and then I use like I'll use like an avocado oil-based mayo on top, or like a chipotle mayo or something like that. But for the vast majority of the time I'm eating them, I just eat them straight out of the can.
That's hardcore. Do you use coconut aminos?
I do not. No, I use, if I'm ever craving like soy sauce or whatever, I use like an organic tamari, just sort of basic fermented
So,
soy sauce.
so the coconut aminos have this great sweetness to them, which balances really well, like with the with the saltiness of the sardines, and just go really well in salad. My roommate's a raw vegan, and so coconut aminos. If you're looking to make like a healthy salad dressing, it's a great way to add sweetness to it without adding sugar. What do you think of
That's awesome.
soaking protein in apple cider vinegar? I've heard that increases like how easy things break down. So like we'll put it in like bone broth, right, and that'll help break down the bones. So I've been soaking my sardines for like 5 minutes in like um, apple cider vinegar, thinking that this is helping. I mean, I'm just curious if soaking it in like a light acid is going to help increase the absorption of the protein.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think apple cider
Uh,
vinegar really holds a candle to the hydrochloric acid in your stomach. But
it's pretty reasonable.
yeah.
We have a question here. What's your take on intermittent fasting?
Yeah, I'm a fan of intermittent fasting. I think it's important to at least fast 12 hours every day. Up to 16 if you can tolerate that. Most men do pretty well on 16 hours of fasting per day. Women I think start slower, or start with like 12 hours or even 14 hours. Um, but yeah, generally I'm a fan of it. I think anytime that you can kind of like give your body a break from food, and allow your body to utilize some of the fuels that it has stored, I think that's a great consideration to make. Certainly from a circadian standpoint, we're meant to eat primarily during the day and maybe the early evening hours, but things start to wind down before bed. And so I recommend to people, rather than get obsessed with the hours and the windows and things like that, to just generally not eat for 2 to 3 hours before bed. And that's pretty much what I do. And I don't, I'm probably not perfect, like all of the time. Like sometimes I'll be eating, up until maybe like 9 p.m. Or 10 p.m. if I go to bed at like midnight or 1 a.m. But generally, I try to stop eating by 8 or 9 p.m. That's it for me, and then I won't eat until 11 or 12 the following day.
Okay. Great. Now, why is intermittent fasting good for the brain? It's a little counterintuitive because it kind of deprives our body of energy for a little while, and then therefore theoretically would deprive the brain of energy. So why is it beneficial to the brain?
Well, it doesn't deprive the brain of energy because the body, the liver will release, like say, the brain, say you're not eating carbohydrates for a significant period of time. Your liver is a storage site for sugar, and your liver will then start to release that sugar into circulation so that your brain can use it. And if your liver is out of sugar, then your liver can basically create sugar in a process called gluconeogenesis. Um, but fasting is a type of stress on the body that's been shown to be beneficial. It can boost levels of BDNF in the brain, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It also can raise your level of sort of mental acuity, because if you think about it, once food stopped being available for a hunter-gatherer, you would need to find that food, and so your brain would sort of go on high alert. So from a cognitive standpoint, it can be beneficial. Um, it also beneficially affects the brain in indirectly as well, in the sense that people who eat earlier dinners, independent of calories consumed, it's been shown that that can actually help reduce blood pressure, and can reduce blood sugar, and things like that. And so both of those, blood pressure and blood sugar reductions in their own, on their own, can help boost brain health, because the brain, we want to have healthy blood pressure and blood sugar levels for the brain. So that's all very important. So yeah, it's just generally, I think, a smart move to make from a metabolic health standpoint.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to share? So here's some of the things we reviewed. Your first experience of Burning Man was boobs on TV. Was streaming some Burning Man, and then you went there in 2018. The key 20% for the food is the dietary challenges we face across populations. It's in general pretty uniform. We as a species are eating 60% of our calories from only 3 plants: wheat, corn, and rice, which are calorie rich but nutrient poor. The genius foods that you shared are avocado, grass-fed beef, chocolate, dark leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, nuts, any berries, wild fatty fish, eggs, extra virgin olive oil, and mushrooms. And we went on mushrooms for a while, talking about how they are filled with vitamins and minerals. They're immunomodulatory, but they're also rich in glutathione, which is the body's master antioxidant. Talked about homocysteine, the Alzheimer's Prevention Toolkit, measuring homocysteine, your fasting blood sugar level, your fasting blood insulin, omega-6 versus omega-3s. Can you overdose on those? Measuring, can you overdose on omega-3s? Vitamin D levels, measuring your lipids, and then the sneaky foods to avoid that kind of sound healthy but aren't are the grain and seed oils like canola, corn, and grapeseed, fruit juices that are just sugar without fiber. Vegetable juices are fine, and granola bars are just candy bars, and cereals are best for desserts. And then we got our survival food kit, which is the healthy brain food that's great for Burning Man or great for the apocalypse that has been upon us for the last 6 months, which is sardines, other canned fatty fish, dark chocolate, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, kale chips that are baked with no added sugars or oils, and beef jerky without too much added sugar. And intermittent fasting is great for the brain because it's a light stressor, which increases BDNF, also increases mental acuity, because when your body isn't having access to food, its awareness goes up. It also helps regulate your blood sugar. I wrote blood sugar reduction. I'm sorry, what was that?
Blood sugar and blood pressure.
Blood sugar and blood pressure. Terrific. All right, so that's anything else you wanted to add to that, or anything that I missed or that I didn't cover?
I think that was fairly comprehensive. I'm super impressed. Great interviewing skills on your part, and I had a really good time chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Max. This is super duper fun. If you want to learn more, if you want to get the book, it's by Max Lugavere. It's called Genius Foods. It is a fantastic title. It's a great cover too, and it's really well written. Check it out. And Max, I hope to see you in one of the virtual Burning Man, or one of the universes, whether it's the Mystic Verse or the Infinite Playa or the Dusty Verse. Hope to play with you in the dust virtually sometime this week.
Me too, man. Can't wait for that.
Thank you so much, Max. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.